Hello and welcome back to the third of our episode on the Sinclair Spectrum, and the nostalgia is strong this time. This is Crash Magazine, and I used to pick this up when I was a kid from the local newsagents. It ran from about 1984 to 1991, and recently I picked myself up a few issues. These also came with the cover mounted cassettes, so it was just like picking up an issue when I was 8 years old in 1988. Now the newsagents hasn't been there for about 25 to 30 years, but there are some things from the 1980s that I remember picking up from that shop. The first is the furry pencil case, which every self-respecting kid needed to have in the 80s. The second was these flip-up things that I searched the internet for, and I cannot find the name of these things, let me know. Used to turn them inside out, put them on the desk, and after 30 seconds or so they'd flip up. And of course, who can forget the garbage pail kids? 13 pence used to buy you a pack of these, along with a stick of bubblegum. But it was Crash Magazine that I remember the most. I did actually have a subscription. Well, my parents bought me a subscription to the magazine back in the day. But the newsagents was only over the road, so pretty much every morning, 2 weeks into the month, I'd go in and start asking, has Crash Magazine arrived yet? Has Crash Magazine arrived yet? And sometimes they'd give it to me even before it was delivered to the house and I'd take it into school. Most of the time though, the lady behind the counter would just give me a simple no and I'd be on my way. There's lots of different sections in the magazine, but you can tell this is a slightly more recent one. They're even advertising the Commodore Amiga now. At this point though, it's probably about 4 or 5 years before I could get my own Commodore Amiga. But as always, it's all about the playability, not just the graphics. There's an advert here for QuickShot joysticks, and I had this QuickShot Maverick arcade stick, and I also had the Python at one point. Maybe I'll pick a few of these up, see how bad they are in the modern day. Even the adverts are nostalgic here. We've got an advert here for the In Crowd, which was a fantastic compilation on the Spectrum. Pretty much every one of these games was a good one. These could be expensive, but it was a good way of picking up a decent amount of good quality games all at the same time. There's a bit here on the upcoming Turtles game, and I remember picking this up from the Macro warehouse. Remember Macro? That was the warehouse where you thought things seemed like a good price, then you got to the till and they added the VAT on. I wish you could get reprints of some of this artwork, I'd love it in my office. Here's Operation Thunderbolt. I remember picking this up with my parents whilst I was in town one day. I got home and realised they'd given me the Amstrad version. Never mind. An advert here for Ghouls and Ghosts, and whilst the Spectrum version doesn't look the best, it plays one of the best out of all of them. I love the Sinclair Spectrum version of this game. Definitely be covering it one day. A cool double page advert here for the Untouchables, another great Spectrum game with really catchy music. And check out this Myth advert, this is awesome. A lot of these adverts were hand painted, as were a lot of Spectrum game boxes back in the day of course. Check out these cool Spectrum accessories. I remember really wanting the light pen at the bottom right hand corner. I had no real use for it, but it was a cool gadget and I wanted it. I never got one. We did get a Kempston interface though, along with this joystick at the top left. My friend Paul picked up this Plus D interface and drive. It basically let you save games to disk, so you could load them faster. And it was also good for getting around copy protection. All those games that said, type in word 3 from paragraph 2 on page 28, that kind of stuff. There's an overview here of the Spectrum Light Phaser, and yeah, I've got to call it the Light Phaser because YouTube doesn't like the G word. This came with one of the Sinclair Spectrum packs, but not many aftermarket games used the Light Phaser. Out of these, Solar Invasion was probably my favourite, followed by Rookie. And how can you forget Bullseye? With loads of questions that 9-year-olds didn't know the answers to. And there's a really cheesy advert to go along with it. There's a phone competition here, doesn't tell you what you need to do to win the prizes. But would you rather spend your 45p a minute trying to win those pair of rollerblades, or would you put it towards that Afterburner arcade cabinet at the top? We got a review of Final Fight, and they've definitely been drinking the hard stuff if they've given this 90%. We should play this at some point just for a laugh. Now which one's the Spectrum and which one's the arcade? Can barely tell the difference. The New Zealand story here, that's another great game on the Spectrum. Yeah, it's in yellow and black, but who cares? I mainly bought this magazine for the reviews, so you could see what was coming up. There was no internet back then, so buying a stinker of a game wasn't that uncommon. Anyway, we're about 5 minutes in now, so let's start looking at some Spectrum stuff. Now in the previous episodes we saw the 128K Spectrum Plus 2 that I picked up, and also the Spectrum 48K. The 48K I've got is in great condition. It's been recapped and it also outputs a composite signal rather than RF. I do have a third Spectrum, that's another 48K. It's sat alone and unloved for far too long. It's not in great condition, this machine, and it's not a particularly desirable model, so we're going to make the best out of it. I don't believe you can buy new 48K Plus keyboard shells yet, but you can buy 48K standard ones. And I got a bit of nostalgia for my 16K rubber key Spectrum, so that's the route we're going to go down. So let's get started. Now, recasing your Sinclair ZX Spectrum is not complicated at all. Anyone can do this, just take things slowly. But this is going to make a world of difference to the appearance of this Sinclair Spectrum, and at the end of it we're going to have something that looks like a new machine. There's just a few Phillips screws to remove from the back of the machine. None of these modern security screws or hex screws or anything like that. The keyboard membrane stuck to the motherboard in two places. You can just pull these out. This keyboard membrane is actually in pretty good condition. I've seen some of these old Sinclair Spectrums where you try and pull these and they will just crumble apart. We get our first look at the motherboard here, and you can see the cable going over the motherboard to the left hand side of the case to the reset switch. That was how basic it was. It basically shorted this capacitor and that reset the system. I'm not going to be recapping this machine, and I'm not going to be changing the RF output. I'm going to leave it pretty much as is. We do need to remove this reset switch though. Remember, the 48K standard version didn't have one. Here's our motherboard. This is a 1983 issue 4S board. I think this was made by Samsung. At the bottom left we've got our RAM chips, and at the bottom right hand corner we've got our little beeper speaker. Maybe we'll hear some of that later. I know this Spectrum did work before I took it apart, so I'm just going to have a quick look at these capacitors just to see if I can see any leaking or any damage or anything like that. Thankfully all looks well here. Some of the early Spectrum motherboards are really sought after these days. If you can get an early issue one, that will sell for hundreds of pounds. To me though, it doesn't make the blind bit of difference. As far as I'm concerned, they all do the same thing, so having an early serial number or anything like that is lost on me. Here's the back of the board, and when I saw one of these for the first time I thought it was falling apart and degrading. But no, this is just part of the cheap solder mask process they used back in the day to save a few quid. Remember, one of the key things about this machine was price, which is why it sold so well. But we've taken the machine apart, so let's give it a new life. So most of these parts I bought from zxrenew.co.uk. There's a new case fascia, a new keyboard mat, a new keyboard membrane, and an upper and lower case. These are all brand new parts and they look and feel just like the old ones. I think the total cost of the parts was probably around £50, not bad at all. Here's our motherboard again. I've given it a bit of a clean up with a paintbrush, and you can see I've clipped where the reset button used to be. I know this doesn't look very pretty, but I didn't really want to desolder this and put heat into these old capacitors. Plus, if I want to go back to the old case, it makes it completely reversible. The motherboard fits perfectly into the smaller case. I'm just doing a test fit of the keyboard membrane here. Just check it fits and sits okay. I did put this on the wrong way to start with, so yeah, good to take your time. The case upper has these little pegs that the keyboard mat sits into, so I'm also going to do a quick test fit of that, just check I'm happy with it. We can now attach our new keyboard membrane to the motherboard. This is actually different to the one we've removed. Remember, the 48K Plus had extra dedicated keys that the 48K standard version didn't have. With the 48K standard version, sometimes you had to press one key and then press another at the same time to get certain characters out. I'm putting things together quite loosely to start with, just to check they work. We don't want to have to take this thing apart again. I've powered the Sinclair Spectrum up. I'm just using it as it is at the moment. I just want to test every single key works. With the keyboard fascia, you have to stick it on at the end. The last thing I want to do is remove it if I've made a mistake or something's got stuck or doesn't work. So I'm testing each key in turn, checking everything works properly. Everything tested okay, so I'm going to screw the two sides of the shells together. I also bought some replacement Sinclair ZX Spectrum rubber feet, so I'm going to fit those now as well. There's 4 feet total, but for some reason they've sent me 2 small feet and 1 large foot, or maybe one that hasn't been properly cut, so I got to take my scissors to that, but it's not too tricky. I'm going to do another refit of the keyboard mat over the membrane, check everything fits in those little pegs. There's not really any going back after this. With the case properly screwed back together, I'm also going to do another round of testing each and every key. Like I say, there's no going back after this. Well, there kind of is, but you'll damage your case fascia and you'll have to buy another one. The new faceplate looks amazing quality. I don't think you'd be able to tell it from an old one, well, other than it's really great and new and not covered in scratches. It fits on with double-sided tape, so you've got to be careful, get it right the first time. You got to do the two side bits first, and then you can do the top and the bottom. Mine did lift a little bit at the top, but I sorted that out later. Use a towel or something like that, something that lets you put a bit of pressure on the board, just so you're making sure that faceplate really sticks. We're done, and what an amazing result. This looks brand new. Such a great design this. I think it looks really modern even today, even though this thing's nearly 40 years old. So now I've got two 48K Spectrums. I got the traditional rubber keys along with the Sinclair ZX Spectrum 48K Plus. This turned out really well. If you've got an Asian Spectrum, give this a go. One final thing I'm going to change on this machine is the power supply. Now I'm no electrician, but from what I understand the one that comes with it is an unregulated power supply. The Spectrum itself wants 9 volts, but the stock power supply can chuck anything up to 14 volts, and the Spectrum itself steps it down. That means more stress on components and more heat in the system, so why not get a power supply that puts out the right voltage in the first place? The stock one only seems to work if I bend the cable in the right direction anyway, so it's definitely due a replacement. There's this one from 9thbit.org, but I picked it up from their eBay shop. I can now use this joystick interface I came across. It's designed to fit the original 48K. You could just about fit it on the 48K Plus, but it wasn't pretty. This Cheetah Mac 1 joystick came with the Spectrum Plus 2 that I bought. It feels horrible and squeaky, but let's at least test if it works. There doesn't seem to be anything on this joystick interface showing what standard it follows. I'm not sure if it's ProTech, Cursor, Sinclair, Kempston or something else. There's 2 ports on it, maybe one does one and one does the other. However, we've definitely got a Sinclair port because the joystick controls are mapped to 6, 7, 8, 9 and 0 or 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Pressing the various directions and the fire button on the joystick makes the numbers appear on the screen. So we can at least be sure it works, but it feels like I'm stirring porridge with this joystick. Let's give it a test with perhaps the most iconic 48K game, Set Willy. When I put this together, I realised I had a problem. It's been so long since I used a rubber key Spectrum that I couldn't actually remember how to get the quotes out when you try and load a game. It's J for load and then symbol shift and PP to get the 2 quotes out. It's written on our new snazzy fascia, but it did take me a moment. But let's see if this loads. A 48K rubber keyed Spectrum with a joystick playing Set Willy. The game loaded first time, and thankfully we got the copy protection card where you have to put in the 4 colours randomly chosen at the start of the game. I think you get 2 chances at this, get it wrong twice and the game resets. I'll be honest, I think this was better played with the keys. It was just a quick load and playthrough just to check everything worked, but I did sit down and have a little go on this. I think we'll get a proper review out of this in some future episodes, along with some of the custom made games. Anyway, these Spectrum episodes are called the Great 8 because we review 8 games. Hopefully good ones. But let's make a start. And let's give our 48K the first shot. This is the Trapdoor, following on from the Kids Claymation series, and I used to love this series and the game as a kid. You play as Burke, and you've got to get him paid. You've got to make a series of meals for the terrifying thing upstairs to get your wages.
Burke, he's my supper ready yet, Burke!
Alright, keep your warts on.
The trusty 48K and the tape deck loads the game first time. These days I run the cassette deck off batteries, it's just one less cable to find. But I'm still amazed some of these old tapes still actually load after all these years. But let's start the game. True to the TV show, Druck gets in the way all the time.
Clear off you.
First thing on the menu is the can of worms. You can get the can from the kitchen area, and the Trapdoor thankfully has a ready supply of worms for you.
Worms.
You've got to catch 3 of the worms that escape, but you've also got to watch out for Drut, because he will chase the worms and take them away from you. He can be a bit of a pain, but he's not too bad.
You look tasty. Buzz off.
After you get your 3 worms, you can send them to the thing upstairs in the dumbwaiter. Don't hang around too long though, otherwise you'll fail the mission.
Burke, will you hurry up?
Believe it or not, that's about as far as a lot of people got in this game. Next on the list is the boiled slimies. I can kinda remember how to do them, however these days in 2021 it's quite easy to find a guide. Not a walkthrough on YouTube, but issue 91, August 1991 of Crash magazine. There's a little guide here in the tip section. I wish I read this before I started playing, but I do at least remember that the slimies are outside in the moat, so let's go get them.
We're just going down the swamp to do a spot of fishing. Oh look, here's a nice spot. I bet there's some tasty snacks swimming about in there.
I think you're supposed to bring the basket with you from the kitchen area. Grab 3 from the moat, put them in the basket, and then you can put them in the cauldron. But the slimies in the cauldron do need to be boiled, and to do this you've got to release one of the monsters from the trapdoor who will heat the cauldron for you. And this is about as far as I got through in my playthrough, playing this again after all these years. First of all, I took ages because I didn't get the basket from the kitchen, so I took each slimy all the way back to the kitchen area, dropped it off the balcony into the cauldron. Could have saved a load of time with the basket, but with the trapdoor monster you have to get him to blow fire onto the cauldron to heat it up, and this is a real pain. If he touches you, he sends you away to a random location. So you've got to move out the way just in time. I was pretty close to doing this, unfortunately I missed it by a few seconds. I did get him to heat up the cauldron, but I was a little bit too slow.
Oh, globbits. Hang on, Drat. Nearly lost you then. You're a tiny twerp.
Also in the trapdoor is the bird which you need for the fried eggs. You've got to put something on the trapdoor, fire it up to hit her, and then catch the eggs in the pan.
I think I might have considerable trouble stuffing that in a sandwich.
So what's it actually like as a game? Well, unfortunately it's a little bit too slow to play these days. Once you've made the various meals, you've kind of done it. You are given a certain amount of time for each mission. Mainly the goal is to do part of the next mission whilst you've still got time for the first mission. That way you can maximise your time and get that all important high score.
Globbits, he's an ugly one. I ain't staying around here.
It's got nice big colourful graphics, and I think the Spectrum does a really good job with this. But for now, let's move on to the next game and say goodbye to Drut.
Right then, I'm fed up with you getting in the way, so I'm gonna get rid of you for good.
Next up on the 48K is Ghosts and Goblins. Now this game has no in-game music whatsoever, so I've included some from the sequel, and I think the game itself has a whopping 2 sounds. Even the TV plugin I reviewed in my first ever episode had 3, so let's see how we get on. We did get a load first time out of this game, no trouble at all. I know the loading screen for this game gets a bit of stick, but I've seen worse. I've seen some games that don't even have a loading screen, so I think it's fine. Like all versions of Ghosts and Goblins, this game is extremely difficult. This version only has 3 levels, but they've made it unbelievably unfair and difficult. It's actually harder than the arcade. I can get a bit further on the arcade than I can on this version. Most people who play this game for the first time probably won't get past the first minute or so of gameplay. So what makes it so difficult? Well, there's a lot of random nature to the game. Enemies tend to appear at random, and their attacks also seem to be random, so you can't really sort of plan where you need to go. You might be doing really well, but it's the luck of the draw with this game. This is the first mini-boss, and a lot of people don't get past this guy. But that's something common for all versions of this game. A lot of people give up right here. The sequel to this game, Ghouls and Ghosts, is also known as being quite difficult, but I think Ghosts and Goblins has got it on the difficulty stakes. I've tried to play using the keys on our newly restored ZX Spectrum, and it really shows how far we've come in the keyboard world. This is basically like trying to play a game on one of those rubber-keyed calculators you got back in school. A little bit further into the first level, and you get to the first boss. Remember, this is a third of the way through the game. This isn't actually too bad, but this is pretty much as far as I can get. This takes you to the start of level 2, where things get even more unfair. These little guys start coming out, flying around all over the place, and whilst they appear to at least be on a timer, it does seem to be random as to where they appear from. Playing the game back in the day, this is pretty much as far as I could get. I might have got a little bit further, maybe to where the platforms start going up and down. But like I say, I can get further on the arcade version. It definitely seems a bit more fair, but you got to make those 3 levels last. Make it over the first big drop over the river, and you come to the hardest bit of level 2, which is this bit with the ladders. You've basically got to go up and up, right, and then down over the other side. But you've got stuff flying at you all the time, and you've got these guys to avoid that take loads of hits, and if they're above you, they'll also drop stuff down on you. The level 2 boss is 2 of the level 1 bosses, but here they attack you from the left and the right. Back in our gaming youth, we used to call bosses in video games Ultimate Harrys. I've got no idea why that was, it was just a thing back in the day. How are you getting on with your new game? I can get to the level 4 Ultimate Harry, but I can't get any further. Well, today we're going to get to the end of this game. This is the last level, and look at the amount of stuff coming at you. The same old mantra with the other versions rings true here. Get the knife, avoid the fireball. The lance you start out with isn't too bad, but the fireball is useless in this game. I managed to find a map online of this game in your Sinclair. I'm not sure what real use this is. It's basically a go left, go right game, but I don't think there's a pause key on this game, so it looks like they've tried to draw it from memory. We're currently at the stage at the very bottom of the game now, and it looks like they've missed out half the stage. Maybe they figured no one would ever get that far, so no one would ever check. Somehow I managed to get right through to the end of this level without using any save states. But that's the easy part. You've got to rescue Princess Prin Prin, and she's stuck on this high platform that you can't get to, and there's 2 of those swooping guys that we really hate from the first level, and that is basically the end boss. This is the end of the game. But trying to beat these last 2 guys is really difficult. All the time you've got to avoid the flying bats as well. There is a bit of a trick to doing this. Basically you can scroll the screen just enough to get one of them to attack you, deal with that one, and then deal with the other one. On this last level, there is a separate route you can take. If you go up, it's actually far more difficult. The only advantage really is you can land on the platform with the princess, but you're going to have to jump off it anyway. There's no way you'll be able to stay on it and avoid the swooping guys. You'll end up wasting more time going the top route anyway. And yep, there's a timer in the game as well, just in case all the stuff flying at you isn't tough enough. This is how I ended up doing it. Scroll the screen just enough to get one on the screen, kill the first guy, and then you've only got one to deal with. But how do you get up to the top platform? Well, you've got to take a hit and then you can get bumped up a bit higher. And finally you get to see the spectacular ending. You have armor in this game so you can take a hit. Get hit again and you lose a life. But check this out, if you've already lost your armor and you've defeated the 2 bad guys at the end, you still need to get up to the top platform. But if you take that second hit, you're gonna die. However, do it here and you earn the ultimate sacrifice bonus. Yep, the game's so difficult you can even complete it as a corpse. For the last of our 48k games, let's take a look at Ghostbusters. I used to really enjoy playing this as a kid. But I haven't played it for about 20 years, so let's hope for the best. The game did load first time, and this is probably the first Spectrum game that I heard speech in, digitised speech. I know that's absolutely nothing these days, but hearing your Spectrum actually form words, it was incredible back in the day, really impressive stuff. The Spectrum makes an attempt at the Ghostbusters theme tune. You can only do so much with that little buzzer speaker. When you start the game, you can kind of pick up where you left off. You can save the money you earned in the last game. This gives you a bit of a boost the next time round. Thankfully, my copy of Ghostbusters was previously owned by a Mr. Craig Sweeney, and Mr. Craig Sweeney has left his details in here so I can use his account. Cheers Craig, whoever you are. With Craig's account, we've got $34,600 to buy stuff with, so we can buy the fastest car and the best equipment. I never used to bother saving an account at the end of each game. It's pretty easy, this game. I never used to struggle with it. You need to buy the traps, you can't start a game without them, but the other things just give you little bonuses and little help elsewhere. I think the graphics look pretty ropey on this game. To be honest, I think they looked pretty ropey back in the day as well. But as always, graphics don't make the game, so let's take a look. So this is the fantastic Ghostbusters game. Not a lot happens. You're basically waiting for a building to flash, so you can go and get your first ghost. It's a bit of a waiting game.
We got one!
So each time there's a flashing building, you've got to drive over to it. We did buy the ghost vacuum, so occasionally ghosts fall down on the screen and you can suck them up for a bit of extra cash. If you didn't buy the ghost vacuum though, you're basically sat here watching this happen. There's nothing you can do. Not really what I'd describe as fun. Get to each location and you've got to trap the ghost. Position your 2 Ghostbusters, fire the streams, and trap the ghost. That's pretty much all there is in the way of gameplay here. There's a couple of different backgrounds to represent the different buildings, but that's pretty much it. Like I say, I haven't played this in many years, this game. And I forgot, I think you're supposed to touch the ghosts here to stop them going to the Zool building in the centre. There's also another bit of speech in the game, and to be fair, it is fairly clear. Keep getting slimed and you've got to go back to the Ghostbusters HQ to get more people. But after that, it's pretty much rinse and repeat. Catch ghosts, get money. You don't get any in-game music with the 48k version, but there is a 128k version of this game which you do get music. So I've added some. If you don't keep the ghosts under control, eventually they will form the Marshmallow Man. That damages buildings, which you've got to pay for, but if you keep catching ghosts fast enough, it's not really a problem. I do remember in this game when you're asked to choose your car at the start, press a number from 1 to 4. However, if you press 0, this happens. Now I always seem to remember that this gave you a car that costs no money. However, it does cost 2,500. Your memory plays tricks on you. At the end of the game, you have to sneak into the building under the Marshmallow Man, and that's pretty much the game. So is it any good? Well, I don't plan to come back to this anytime soon. I think that'll last me, at least for this lifetime. Finally, this time we're busting out the 128k plus 2. And we're playing one of my favourite games on the system. This is Renegade. My plus 2 tape deck's still a little bit ropey. However, turn it over, give it a well placed tap, and it loads fine. I've still not got round to refurbishing this thing. Maybe next time. A lot of people really love this game. It's got really tight controls, it's got great presentation, and it's really playable. If I want a quick 10 minutes on a Spectrum game, this is probably what I'll choose to play. I am pretty good at this game, so I can get through it pretty quickly. I gave it a go with a joystick and it was horrible. I couldn't wait to get back to playing with keys. It has got a few oddities, this game. Here I'm playing it on my Spectrum Plus 2A and you'll notice there's no in-game music. I think on some versions of the Plus 2A and the Grey Plus 2 you do get in-game music, so let's switch over. So now we get the in-game music, and no, it wasn't the 48k version I was playing on the 128 plus 2 there. I wish I knew what caused this issue. Maybe there's different chipset versions that it runs on and ones it doesn't. On my own computer at the time, I always remember playing this without the music. But one day I took this around my friend Paul's house and I was amazed to hear the music. I love the first level of this game. I can complete it really quickly. A few knees to the love spuds and a few throws, and it's all over. You got the bikers on level 2. Give them a flying kick to knock them off. However, there is a bit of a bug here too. If you miss too many or avoid too many, they just basically stop coming. You can wait the timer out and try again. Each of the levels in this game is only sort of 3 screens long, and in the first level I never see the leftmost screen, and in level 2 I never see the rightmost screen. I'm always trying to get them to the edge, back kick, 2 knees in the nuts, and throw them over the edge. You've got to get a 2 for 1, throwing one enemy into another and knocking them both off the edge. That's the good stuff. This is such a short game, this one, but it's so much fun to play. I really enjoy this one. Even after all these years, I keep coming back to this game. On level 3 you've got Big Bertha, or Steamroller as we used to know her, although I think she's got several names. This is the boss of the level at the top right, and she is no joke. She will run into you and take you down fast. If you get too far away from her, she will charge you. But that's what you need to do to beat her. Wait for her to charge you, do the flying kick and take her out. Once the health is low you can attack on the floor, but the last and finishing move must be a flying kick. It's pretty much the law. On level 4 there's no boss, but the knife men here will kill you in one hit. You got to be really careful. This stage doesn't appear in the 48k version, but the 4 knife men do appear in the next level, so you do still fight the same number of enemies. In the 48k version you also don't get the throw move, which actually makes the 48k version quite a bit harder. On the last level you've got to avoid the guy with the gun, and you've also got to avoid the knife men. I played a bit sloppy here, didn't keep them far away enough from each other and ended up getting stabbed. Next life I wasn't quick enough to avoid the bullets, but I played through again and got to the end. There's probably only a few people that never played Renegade on the Spectrum. It's probably the best version of this game, and that includes the arcade and the 16-bit versions. It just plays so well, it's an absolute classic. I always keep coming back to this game. When you complete the game you play through again, but the enemies have got a bit more health. But if you can keep throwing them off the edge, it's not too bad.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
That was the famous Destroyer of Worlds speech by Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb and overseer of the Manhattan Project. So that was Destroyer of Worlds. I'm going to show you Destroyer of Joysticks. This is Combat School, and it's a joystick waggler, where you've got to move the joystick left to right as fast as possible to build up your power and press the fire button to perform an action. We'll be putting the joystick through its paces here, but this could well be the end of it. The game had a little trouble loading, but thankfully I got 2 releases of this. I got the full price release and the budget release, and it's been a long time since I've played this game. I forgot how hard it was to play these games, how tiring it is. I think I'd probably get carpal tunnel if I stuck at this, but let's have a quick training session first and then we'll start over.
Come on, go on and get him! Get him, get him, get him! Come on, what's the matter with you? Get him! Pick him up! Put him down! Pick him up! Put him down! What's the matter, you're so fast?
So we'll start the obstacle course all over again, and something odd happened here. I think the game took pity on me. For some reason I got a nice bug here and didn't need to climb over any of the walls, I can just run straight through them, so I thought I'd get an awesome time. But I still ended up having to do penalties. So there's quite a few games like this. Another is Daley Thompson's Decathlon. I'm sure we'll end up taking a look at that one in the future as well. But yeah, this game kills joysticks. I think we broke our QuickShot 2 Plus joystick on this one. The joysticks without micro switches tend to be a bit more fragile, but I remember me and my brother playing this on our crappy chipboard computer desk, shaking the joystick left and right so fast that the TV actually slipped off the top of the desk. Thankfully we managed to catch it. I couldn't work out the penalties thing to start with. I think you're supposed to waggle the joystick, do a chin up and then release. I just kept waggling but hoping for the best. On the shooting range stage we always used to switch over to the keyboard. I think it was just a bit more accurate and easy to hit the targets, but I'm going to stick with the squeaky joystick on this one. Thankfully here you don't need to hit every target, you just need to hit enough to make the grade. The Iron Man stage is where I start to fall down. I always find this stage a bit tricky to get through. You've got to keep waggling the joystick to build up speed, but you can also hold left and hold right to avoid obstacles and press fire to jump. When we were playing this growing up, we got through all the various stages, and I think one of the last ones is the fight with the instructor, but I don't think we could ever get past it. This is still a fun game though. I think if you were to play this after a long pub session, I think you'd have a hell of a laugh if you were playing this with a bunch of friends. I am actually putting together a little bit of a collection of 80s joysticks, so in a future episode we're going to see which one is king of the wagglers. We'll do a head-to-head of all the joysticks and we'll see which one comes out on top. Next we follow up with the second of the Renegade games. This is Target Renegade, and for a lot of people this is the best scrolling fighting game on the system. I did have to have 2 attempts at loading this, but we did get there in the end. I had another go with the joystick, but I was nowhere near as accurate as I was with keys. I think with the older Spectrums, a joystick was always better than using the rubber keys or plastic keys of the 48K Plus, but when the Spectrum Plus 2 and Plus 3 came out, they had a really decent keyboard, and that's generally what I tended to use. You start out in the multi-storey car park, and I always remember this area being the tightest on time. I usually tend to lose a life before I get out of here, but it's not too bad. I'm trying to do the floor punches here, but for whatever reason I can't seem to pull them off on this joystick. Maybe it's something to do with the way I've configured the controls. I always find the best 2 moves for this game are the flying kick, which you can knock down several enemies at once, and the back kick, which can pretty much take down anyone. This time round though, the game is a 2 players at the same time game. I haven't had a 2-player on this game for probably 30 years, so I can't remember if you get more enemies in 2-player mode. This time round, however, you can get kneed in the knackers. The trick on this level is to avoid the gunman, or even better, use him to your advantage. If you position an enemy in front of him, then someone else can eat that bullet. The rest of the street level's not too bad. After you finish that, you can go on to the park. The park's not too bad either. You have to fight the guys, the peanut head guys as I used to call them, and the teddy boys, just because the arms look like teddies to me. And on this stage you can pick up the hatchet, that's the weapon on this stage. I do really like Target Renegade, but for me the original still reigns supreme. I just like the simplistic controls and how responsive the original is. Target Renegade is great though, and there's certainly a bit more variation in this game, so you can always see there's a debate about which one's the best. Back out on the street, you have to avoid the cartoon killer dogs, and here the enemies start to get a bit of strategy. If you try the flying kick, they'll try and duck your attack. Stick with the back kick. Finally, in the pub on the last level, you'll find a load of old geezers. However, these old geezers are the toughest guys in the game. If they grab you, they will smack you down fast. They also carry the pool cue, and you really want this for the last final boss of the game. It makes things a lot easier. It kind of shows what games were though. In the latest Halo or Call of Duty, you're probably fighting to save the world. Here you're smashing pensioners with a pool cue. If you manage to beat enough pensioners, you can finally take on Mr. Big, who doesn't hang out in some shadowy underground lair, but in a pub games room. You got to be really careful with this guy. If he grabs you, he will shake you and take away an entire life. There's no real strategy to this, you've just got to avoid him and whack him with the pool cue. If you come in here without the pool cue, it's a whole lot harder, and I think you've got to use the back kick to defeat him, so you'll be glad you brought it. It's a great game though, I'd love to come back and play this on a 2-player again at some point, but it's well worthy of high praise. Up next is Midnight Resistance, and this is probably one of my favourite games on the system. I remember playing a demo of this game, I think it came on the Sinclair user cover tape, and I thought it was absolutely incredible. I think my parents gave me £20 for what would have been my 10th birthday that year, and I wanted to go to town and pick this up. Thankfully I managed to find a copy in Electronics Boutique, or what Electronics Boutique was before it was Electronics Boutique, if anyone remembers, and I also picked up Impossible at the same time. Both good games, and we got a load out of this first time. So let's take a look at the first level. This was the level that came on the Sinclair user cover tape, and this is what made me want to buy it. The level's really short. If you really tried, you could probably complete this in less than a minute, but I just really like the explosions, the character control and the enemies. It just seemed to work so well. This is actually a conversion of the arcade machine of the same name. Now the Spectrum's got no hope of getting anywhere near the quality of that, but it did do a conversion in its own little way. We've got this cartoon graphics approach, and I think it works really well. It's a great conversion, and it plays really nice and fast, and it's also got all the levels of the arcade. You are restricted to 1 player at a time though, there's no 2 players at the same time, which is a bit of a shame, but probably a little bit too much for the humble Spectrum. And that was it, that was the end of demo level 1, that's as much as you got, but I thought it was fantastic. I was going to buy this game no matter what. The various enemies in the game drop keys, and you can use the keys to purchase weapons in the weapon rooms between levels. It's all about figuring which is the best weapon for which level. Now Midnight Resistance is probably one of the few games that I had absolutely mastered. There was nothing more I had to learn on this game. I could finish the game without getting hit a single time, and I could also complete it really quickly as well. Coming back to it, my skills are nowhere near as sharp as they used to be. I've got a lot to learn, or relearn should I say. But I am tempted to pick this up again, spend some time learning it again just to get back to where I was. It's such a fun game, I think I just enjoy getting better and better at it. The game's got some awesome varied levels, and I don't think there's a real truly bad version of this game. Maybe the Amstrad version, but yeah, if you can pick this up on any system, I'm sure you'll have a really good time. The Mega Drive version's really good, the Amiga version's really good, the arcade version is the greatest. If you've ever played the arcade of this, it has rotary controllers, so you've got the up, down, left, right, but the joystick itself actually turns, so you can choose which direction you shoot in. Obviously you didn't get that with the home computers and consoles, but I think they did a really good job working within their limits. On the last level, there's the last Ultimate Harry of the game, and this is King Crimson, and I think there was a rock band back in the day called King Crimson, correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, if you can pick up this game for any system, definitely pick it up, it's an absolute classic. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a Data East Arcade Classics collection. In my dream arcade room, I'd love to have the arcade cabinet of this game. I've only ever played it once, and I think that was before I even knew the arcade had rotary controllers, so I think I played it and thought it was broken because you couldn't aim in the direction you needed to. But this is a great game. Play it, pick it up, do what you need to play it.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
On to our last game now, and we are opening up the bowels of hell, and not in a good way. We started this episode looking at Crash Magazine. Now we're going to look at the game that for a lot of people killed it. Adverts for Renegade 3 were starting to appear, and the first 2 games, as we've seen in this episode, were absolute masterpieces. We could not wait to get our hands on this game. It touted itself as the final chapter, so this was going to be the best game of the bunch. Crash Magazine reviewed this game at a whopping 91%, and they gave the game its coveted Crash Smash status. With Spectrum games, you had lots of colourful games, but generally games that were in sort of monochrome or single colour graphics had a bit more detail to them. So although the game didn't look particularly colourful, it did have lots of detail in it, and it looked really cool and interesting to play. We did get some cool cover art with this, so it looked promising. The game loaded first time. I'll let you be the judge if that's a good or a bad thing. But put yourself in the mind of a youngster, experiencing those first 2 classic games and then coming to this. So let's play the game. The first few seconds of the game you think aren't that bad. The music sounds okay, the graphics look okay. The moment there's any sort of combat in the game is where it completely falls on its ass. Not to mention you've got what looks like a baby at the top of the screen throwing potatoes down at you. It just plays so poorly, this game. You've got a time limit to finish each level like you have in the other ones, but this one is really tight. There's set areas where you have to fight all the enemies to continue, so basically to get to those areas you walk right and you avoid any other enemies. There's no point fighting these guys whatsoever, they don't hold you up, just get to the bits where you need to fight the enemies. When you do actually get in combat, there's pretty much only one move that works, and that is the low ducking punch. That's pretty much your only go-to attack in this game. I thought this game was absolutely atrocious when I first played it, and I think the same now. The worst thing is Crash Magazine actually doubled down on this and they re-reviewed it on budget a few months later and they gave it 89%. You can't believe the cheeky bastards, maybe they were getting paid off for this one. But even now, 30 years later, people still talk about the Renegade 3 review in Crash Magazine and how it caused them to lose all trust, and you cannot blame them. So this game's all about travelling through the past, so let's leave this game in the past where it belongs. I just don't know how they got this game so wrong after the first two games. This game absolutely killed the series and there were no more Renegade games after this. It's no wonder the opinion of Crash Magazine went down after this. I mean, we've all bought some stinkers sometimes, but probably none as bad as this one. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. There are a couple of things I want to go through at the end of this one. You might well be familiar with Retro Man Cave or RMC The Cave. It's a really popular YouTube channel. Neil's on there trying to fix old hardware and get it running again, and he's also trying to build an exhibition space that hopefully someday we'll be able to visit and play with some of this retro hardware. One of Neil's regular guests is Mark from Mark Fixes Stuff. He helps Neil with a lot of the more technically involved repairs, and he also has his own channel, Mark Fixes Stuff. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of a tragedy lately and Mark's house has unfortunately caught fire. Mark has lost a lot of his personal belongings, not to mention a lot of his equipment and all of his old retro consoles. Mark's a great guy and I always see his comments over YouTube trying to help other people with their issues, so hopefully we can give something back. Give Mark a quick subscription if you're not subscribed to him already, just help him out, watch a few videos, that kind of thing. Just try and get him back on his feet. I know I'm absolutely no one on YouTube, but if one person could give him a subscribe, that'd be awesome. There is a link if you want to help out, posted on Neil's Twitter. I have sent a few quid myself, and when I donated this morning, this had about 8k of donations. Now it's probably over 20,000. It really does show what a pillar of the community Mark is. But if you can't afford to donate anything, just drop him a sub. I'm sure he'd really appreciate it. So I wasn't initially going to do another episode on the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, but when Clive Sinclair passed away earlier last month, it seemed appropriate. Like a lot of people in the UK, I'm sure our first experiences with a computer would have been with one of Sinclair's machines. For myself, it would have been the 48K Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and it was using that got me interested into computers in the first place. These days I do work in IT in the medical industry, so I guess kind of picking up Sinclair's machines brought me to where I was, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I was never much of a programmer or anything like that, but I do remember playing some of the earlier games that you could break into, press the break key and you could look at the code and change things. There was one early game, I think it was Postman Pat or maybe a Sooty and Sweep game, and there was one part of the game where Sooty or Postman Pat had a shop, and it had the name of the shop at the top of the screen, but because you could break into the program you could find out where that name of that shop was, and I remember changing the name of that shop to many humorous things to a 9-year-old. But as funny as that sounds, it did let you sort of look at how the code fits together. You know, what does what, how do things work, how a sound's made, how a graphic's shown on the screen. But it wasn't just computers that Clive made. Clive bought us the Sinclair Executive Calculator and not forgetting the Sinclair C5 electric vehicle. Now back in the day that was absolutely hammered, but look where we are now. People are already driving electric vehicles. It's likely the laws surrounding using your own electric scooter are going to be relaxed soon, so he was a bit ahead of his time. Sinclair Vehicles also designed the A-Bike, a fold-up bike, and I really wanted one of those, but they're quite collectible these days, so I don't think I'll be affording one anytime soon. Not to mention the pocket television. I think Clive was definitely an inventor first and a businessman second, and from what I've read he always seemed a little bit displeased about how the Sinclair brand was basically known for gaming, rather than in any serious business use. But how many young developers would have started out on his system, got to know the ropes and then moved on to other systems? He's probably the whole reason why a whole generation of programmers and developers are where they are today. For all the retro systems I own and all the games that I've collected over the years, it's definitely the Sinclair brand that I have the most nostalgia for. It was just amazing how people managed to do so much with so little, from games like Set Willy to games like Castle Master, which shouldn't even have been possible. And here we are nearly 40 years later and people are still making games for this system, and good ones too. Next year is going to be the 40th anniversary of the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and I think there are a few events on, and I'm definitely going to get myself over to a few of these, drink in the nostalgia and play with some old hardware. There's just so many memories of playing with this system, playing games with friends, all of us meeting up, getting our games together and having a massive swap shop, and playing some new stuff. The excitement when the Sinclair Light Phaser came out, 2-player games, and the advent of the Spectrum Plus 3 with a disc drive. These were all small incremental steps, but it's been great fun following it every step of the way. In his later years, Clive himself didn't actually have a computer, he just didn't find it necessary. I know he was a keen poker player. If you look on YouTube you can find some old episodes he's in, but it just seems a bit of a shame that he wasn't fully aware of the impact he made on some people, their interest in the Sinclair machines and onto other machines. But for now, thank you Sir Clive, and thanks for the memories.